It's the power. The holy water. It's the power of Unkle Orlok that compels you. The power of Orlok compels you! 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 Goody goo.
Stick your up her ass, you motherfucking worthless sucker.
Hello, nieces and nephews, and welcome back to Unkle Orlok's Vault for a very special episode commemorating the 50th anniversary of what many consider to be the scariest movie ever made, The Exorcist. Released on December 26, 1973, The Exorcist broke box office records, scaring many of the movie-going audience out of the theater seats and into church pews. Not many horror movies can make that claim. Both controversial and groundbreaking, The Exorcist changed how Hollywood perceived horror movies. From its origin as a best-selling novel by author William Peter Blatty to its gritty, realistic cinematic approach by the Academy Award-winning director of The French Connection, William Friedkin, The Exorcist has gone on to become a movie classic, which has yet to be matched. So grab your crucifix and a bowl of pea soup as we look back on The Exorcist. Oh, by the way, we have a guest here at the vault. Hello, Reagan.
Bonjour.
Oh, bonjour.
La plume de ma tante.
Okay, hitting me with the French. Are you ready for this special episode, Reagan?
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
That's a spirit. Did you want to add anything before we get started?
In time.
You can introduce the...
In time.
Oh, okay then.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
The story begins in northern Iraq at an archaeological dig. We're introduced to world-weary Father Merrin, who we will eventually come to know as the titular exorcist. A small artifact is unearthed from beneath this ancient soil, which Merrin recognizes as the demon Pazuzu. Pazuzu is never mentioned by name in the film, but is identified in the novel. Pazuzu is not the invention, by the way, of author William Peter Blatty, but rather comes from historical ancient Babylon and Sumerian religion. It was believed to be an evil spirit, a deity that carries on the winds. This malicious figure, recreated in statue form by the filmmakers, can be seen in its authentic antiquity form at the British Museum in London. With the unearthing of this figure, Merrin's spiritual intuition tells him that a confrontation with this demon is on the horizon. Cut to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., where we are introduced to Chris MacNeil and her 12-year-old daughter, Reagan. MacNeil is a famous actress shooting a film in Georgetown University. While staying at one of the more upscale Federalist houses next to the university, Reagan spends her days with the family servants and playing with a Ouija board, communicating with an unseen presence, which Reagan introduces to her mother as Captain Howdy.
Wait a minute, you need truth.
No, you don't. I do it all the time.
Oh, yeah? Well, let's both play. You really don't want me to play, huh?
No, I do. Captain Howdy said no.
Captain who?
Captain Howdy.
Who's Captain Howdy?
You know, I make the questions and he does the answers.
Unfortunately, this presence may not be imaginary or benign at all, as strange sounds start being heard in the house at night. Reagan also starts to experience weird symptoms.
Hey, I think we've got a guest.
You're gonna die up there.
And then exhibits disturbing behavior with violent spasms and attacks. Her behavior increasingly becomes more unsettled and even potentially criminal. Chris immediately takes Reagan to the hospital where doctors order invasive neurological tests to be done. When scans of Reagan's brain show no neurological damage, Chris and the doctors then recommend bringing Reagan to a child psychiatrist.
I'm speaking to the person inside of Reagan now. If you are there, you too are hypnotized. I must answer all my questions. Come forward. Answer me now.
Simultaneously, there is an incident of sacrilegious vandalism, the profane defiling of Catholic iconography at the nearby university chapel. While all this is happening, we are also introduced to Father Damien Karras, a Jesuit priest and psychiatrist who is suffering from a crisis of faith, especially after his mother dies, having been left alone while sick.
He's our psychiatric counselor. He had a pretty rough knock last night, poor guy. His mother passed away. She was living by herself, and I guess she was dead a couple of days before they found her.
We see this in one of the most extraordinarily conceived and constructed dream sequences ever put to film. In this dream, Karras tries in vain to call to his late mother as she looks around lost, descending into the subway. A few brief frames of a demonic face are almost subliminally cut into the sequence, furthering the unsettling tone. Meanwhile, Reagan's affliction becomes more unpredictable and violent.
Chris, doctors.
Mother, please! Please, take it down! It's burning! It's burning!
Do something, doctor, please help her.
Please, Mother! We'll make it stop! He's trying to kill me! Mother! Take it!
Suddenly news that Chris's friend, the director of the film she's making, Burke Dennings, has been found dead at the bottom of the stone stairs adjacent to her house, beneath her daughter's window. Lieutenant Kinderman enters the proceedings as he investigates the mysterious and violent death of Burke Dennings, believing he was pushed by a very powerful man from Reagan's window. Things then come to an eruptive cinematic turning point when one of the most assaulting moments in the film occurs. Impressively, this is unpredictably violent and profane moment still has the power to shock audiences today.
Jesus, fuck you!
This results in Chris taking Reagan to a special clinic where a team of doctors examine the 12-year-old, trying to come up with a diagnosis. When all is said and done, modern science submits when one of the head doctors asks Chris if she's ever heard of the religious rite of exorcism.
It's purely a force of suggestion. The victim's belief in possession is what helped cause it. So in that same way, the belief in the power of exorcism can make it disappear.
You're telling me that I should take my daughter to a witch doctor. Is that it?
As a result, under desperate straits, the atheist agnostic Chris meets with the beleaguered Father Karras, asking for an exorcism which Karras cannot provide. She pleads with him to at least see Reagan. When Karras does, he's confronted by a perverted, demonic monster manifested inside the body of Reagan.
Well, then let's introduce ourselves. I'm Damien Karras.
And I'm the devil. Now kindly undo these straps.
When Karras brings the case up to the clerical superiors in the church, they discuss that there is only one priest they know of who has had experience performing an exorcism, and that is Father Meridoc. The story of The Exorcist is based on a chilling true case that a young William Peter Blatty first heard about while attending Georgetown University as a student.
Well, in 1949, I believe I was a junior at Georgetown University. And in class, I heard some details about a so-called case of possession and an exorcism.
He subsequently found an article about the case printed in the Washington Post from 1949. The newspapers reported that a 14-year-old boy from Cottage City, Maryland, known as Robbie or Roland Doe, was possessed by a demonic entity and priests were called in to perform an exorcism. The boy, raised in a German Lutheran family, allegedly first fell victim to the paranormal disturbances after asking for a Ouija board for his birthday. The boy's aunt had gifted him one, but after she passed away, the boy started experiencing abnormal things around the house. Rattlings in the walls, strange noises, and flying objects. The Exorcist recreates many of the alleged details from this case, such as the family claiming to witness furniture flipping over, Roland's mattress shaking uncontrollably, and a crucifix pushing itself to the end of the bed. Scratches also allegedly appeared on the boy's body from beneath the skin. Roland's family contacted every expert, including a psychiatrist, all leading to a dead end. After getting no answers, the family finally received help from Father Raymond J. Bishop, and multiple exorcisms were later performed in St. Louis. So what happened to the boy in this true exorcist story? Well, there has been a cloud of mystery surrounding Roland Doe, as his actual identity has been purposely kept undisclosed for years. Over 75 years later, followers of the case believe that the real exorcist victim is Ronald Unkle, a former NASA engineer who helped with the 1969 moon landing. Unkle died of a stroke just a month shy of his 86th birthday in 2020, passing away at his home in Marrittsville, Maryland. William Peter Blatty always kept this true story account in the back of his mind as a possible future screenplay or book. Many years later, after Blatty became an established screenwriter in Hollywood, having written a number of Blake Edwards comedies like A Shot in the Dark and What Did You Do in the War, Daddy?, Blatty went to see Roman Polanski's film adaptation of Ira Levin's novel Rosemary's Baby, which became a huge box office hit in 1968. Believing he had an even scarier story concerning the devil, Blatty finally started work on his novel, The Exorcist. Blatty is said to have written the book over the course of several weeks in a fugue state, every night beginning at dusk and writing until dawn. Blatty later claimed to have obtained a copy of the official report of the true case, a 26-page log or diary compiled by the late Reverend William S. Bowdern, who conducted the real-life exorcism. Blatty supposedly received it after he wrote the novel. In 1993, the diary was published as part of a book called Possessed, The True Story of an Exorcism, which, for those interested, provides a meticulous account of the real events. The novel of The Exorcist became an immediate hit in 1971, eventually topping the New York Times bestseller list. Blatty made a deal with John Calley at Warner Brothers to adapt it into a movie. Warner Brothers had first approached directors Arthur Penn, Mike Nichols, and even Stanley Kubrick to helm the picture. All of them turned it down for one reason or another. Blatty, as writer and producer, having negotiated for director approval, wanted only one person, William Friedkin. Blatty had met Friedkin a few years before when he was working on a Blake Edwards project in development. Blatty became impressed with Friedkin when, in his typical style, Friedkin bluntly told Blatty the script he had written for Edwards was terrible. Blatty, finding it refreshing to hear the truth from someone in Hollywood instead of having smoke blown up his ass, kind of like this smoke, remembered the tenacious Friedkin. Friedkin also just had come off of directing his first major studio hit with the gritty New York crime cop thriller The French Connection, which won Best Picture at the Oscars, and Friedkin took home an Academy Award for Best Director. When Blatty sent Friedkin a copy of his manuscript, Friedkin claims to have started reading it, then quickly realizing he was hooked, canceled his plans for that night, and instead read the whole novel in one sitting. Needless to say, Friedkin was attracted to the material. This brings us to the essential part of casting The Exorcist. The character of Regan's mother, Chris MacNeil, was loosely based on actress Shirley MacLaine, who was friends with William Peter Blatty at the time he was writing the novel. Obviously, the character is supposed to be a famous Hollywood actress, and the last name of MacNeil sounds a lot like MacLaine. Other big-name actresses who were considered for the role included Anne Bancroft and Jane Fonda, who turned the project down.
Jane Fonda, she said, "Why would I want to be involved with a capitalist rip-off piece of shit like this?"
New York actress Ellen Burstyn, who was lesser known at the time, having done mostly Broadway and was a pupil of Lee Strasberg's Actors Studio, had just come off her breakthrough movie role in Peter Bogdanovich's The Last Picture Show in 1971. Burstyn campaigned for the role of Chris MacNeil to director William Friedkin, and obviously won the part. Renowned Swedish actor Max von Sydow, well known for his many collaborations with filmmaker Ingmar Bergman, like The Seventh Seal, Wild Strawberries, The Virgin Spring, plus many more, had also starred in a few Hollywood movies up to this point, like Hawaii, 1966, as well as George Stevens' The Greatest Story Ever Told, 1965, where he played Jesus Christ. I mean, who better to confront the devil than Jesus himself? Or rather, a Swedish atheist who was 43 years old at the time of filming, playing a 79-year-old Catholic priest and titular exorcist. For the pivotal role of the conflicted and haunted Damien Karras, a rather unknown New York actor and playwright, Jason Miller, also campaigned for the role, convincing Friedkin after doing a screen test and telling the director that he had originally considered studying to become a Jesuit priest. Before The Exorcist, Miller had achieved the most acclaim as a playwright, winning the Tony Award and Pulitzer Prize for his play that championship season. Both Friedkin and Burstyn recognized that Miller not only had the intense, dark look for Damien Karras, but also a brooding sadness present in his eyes, which was key to the character, who has the biggest arc in the film. For the role of homicide detective Lieutenant Kinderman, veteran actor Lee J. Cobb stepped into the trench coat. Cobb had appeared in over 100 films and TV shows over the course of his career. Some of his most notable roles include Juror Number 3 in Sidney Lumet's film 12 Angry Men, and the heavy Johnny Friendly in Elia Kazan's On the Waterfront. The disheveled mensch but cunningly observant Lieutenant Kinderman is rumored to have been a partial inspiration for the character Columbo, made famous by Peter Falk on TV. The character of Lieutenant Kinderman would later be reprised in The Exorcist 3, this time with George C. Scott taking over the role. In the novel, Regan MacNeil is described as an innocent, freckled-faced 11-year-old girl who has a shy and diffident nature. When Mike Nichols was originally offered to direct The Exorcist, the main reason he gave for turning down the project was that he felt it would be impossible to find a preteen girl who could play the demonically possessed Regan, especially considering the more profane actions and vulgar language the possessed girl uses throughout the film.
You fucking bastard!
She had to embody that innocence of a shy girl whose parents are going through a divorce, who also is intelligent with an artistic nature. This while gradually turning into a foul, demonic beast. Friedkin and Blatty had their work cut out for them, reportedly auditioning over 500 young actresses before landing on 12-year-old Linda Blair. Blair worked as a child model at age 5, appearing in Sears, JCPenney, and Macy's catalogs. She also appeared in over 70 commercials for Welch's Grape Jams and various other companies. At age 6, Blair secured a contract for a series of print ads in the New York Times. At the same age, she began riding horses, later becoming a trained equestrian. The cherubic-faced Linda Blair was very naturalistic on screen, and could absolutely be believable as the young privileged girl. But could she handle the more demanding aspects of playing the demonically possessed Regan? During the first encounter between Father Karras and the fully demonic Regan, taking place in that infamous bedroom, Blatty's description of her in the novel is unsettling to say the least. Blatty writes,
He closed the door. Then his eyes locked, stunned, on the thing that was Regan, on the creature that was lying on his back in the bed, head propped against the pillow, while eyes bulging wide, their hollow sockets shone with mad cunning and with burning intelligence, with interest and with spite, as they fixed upon his, as they watched him intently, seething in a face shaped into a skeletal, hideous mask of mind-bending malevolence. The eyes gleamed fiercely, unblinkingly, and a yellowish saliva dribbled down from a corner of her mouth to her chin. Then her lips stretched taut into a feral grin, into bow-mouthed mockery. Well, 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 gloated Regan sardonically, and hairs prickled on the back of Karras's neck.
To achieve this deep voice described in the book, Friedkin first assigned production sound mixer Chris Newman to experiment with pitch shifting her voice.
We took Linda Blair's voice in the pre-production, and we spent 150 hours making Linda Blair's voice into a different voice.
Your mother's in here with us, Karras.
We made her sound bad, evil. And I'm the devil! We played the stuff for Friedkin, and he turned around and he said, "That's no good." You know, I thought, oh, fuck, 150 hours of work just out the window.
When that was quickly discovered not to work, they also realized it couldn't be a man's voice either, but rather a voice with an abstract, androgynous tone. This is where the casting of veteran actress Mercedes McCambridge came in. Known for films like George Stevens' Giant, Nicholas Ray's Johnny Guitar, and Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, McCambridge often played eccentric and sometimes coded character parts. She possessed a husky, almost whiskey timbre to her voice. McCambridge, a devout Catholic, accepted the voice acting role. At her insistence, she had William Friedkin lash her to the chair in the recording studio. She would also smoke cigarettes and drink whiskey, sometimes even gargling with a raw egg to achieve the voice. Friedkin described a sound coming out of McCambridge at one point that almost sounded like two voices. It's an extraordinary feat in voice acting.
The most curious things would happen in her throat. Double and triple sounds would emerge at once. Wheezing sounds, very much akin to what you could imagine a person inhabited by various demons would sound like.
The voice was then supplemented and mixed with other sounds. Friedkin told the sound crew that he wanted the voice to sound like an Hieronymus Bosch painting. That direction was interpreted by the crew to mean a chorus of voices mixed with animal sounds. The look of Regan as she slowly deteriorates and becomes more and more demonic fell on the shoulders of legendary makeup artist Dick Smith and his team. Smith had previously done the makeup effects for The Godfather, Little Big Man, the series Dark Shadows, and would go on after The Exorcist to do the makeup effects for Taxi Driver, The Deer Hunter, Altered States, Scanners, and Amadeus, which he took home an Academy Award for. Smith, a giant in the movie makeup effects world, has been singled out as a major inspiration by many of today's top modern makeup effects artists, including Tom Savini, Greg Nicotero, and Rick Baker. His work on The Exorcist is perhaps the most iconic. While developing the makeup for Linda Blair's demonic transformation, there was a lot of trial and error. The first few makeup designs tested were dismissed by William Friedkin as looking too witchy. Inspiration finally came to Friedkin, though, through a scene where Regan mutilates herself with a metal crucifix. He suggested to Smith that the makeup could be motivated by the self-inflicted wounds Regan did to herself using the crucifix to essentially scar her own face. These wounds over time would become gangrenous. With that new direction, Smith created a realistic and unsettling makeup punctuated by the contact lenses the 12-year-old Blair had to endure, which covered the entire eye. Some of the other more iconic moments from the film Smith created was the projectile vomit scene. Performed by an adult body double for Linda Blair, Eileen Dietz, in order to achieve the effect, Dietz was fitted with an apparatus created by Smith using a heat-forming plastic, molded into flat tubes and connected to a nozzle which sat snug in the actress's mouth. The tubes were then hidden under the partial latex mask appliance, and a mix of oatmeal and pea soup was pumped through the tubes by special effects technician Marcel Vercotier. Friedkin, though dissatisfied with the effect, reshot the scene with Blair, but opted to optically superimpose a larger stream of projectile vomit. By the way, I hope you're not eating anything while watching this video. The other iconic moment is the head spinning 360 degrees. To achieve this, Dick Smith and mechanical effects designer Marcel Vercotier created a puppet complete with a mechanically controlled rotating head made from a mold of Linda Blair and filled with foam latex. The puppet also had radio-controlled eye movements and breathing. Now, if you're ever in New York City and would like to get a close look at her in person, just make your way up to Astoria, Queens, where the puppet can still be found today behind glass at the Museum of the Moving Image. Sometimes the museum actually has her chest breathing turned on, which is unsettling to see in person behind glass. It's creepy. Production on The Exorcist began on August 14, 1972. In the Georgetown area of Washington, D.C. The Federalist house the McNeils reside in and was used for exterior shooting is located on the corner of Prospect and 36th Ave, right near the Potomac River and down the block from Georgetown University. The steep, treacherous-looking stone steps Burke Dennings and later Father Karras plunged to their deaths on is right next to the house. Once called the Hitchcock Stairs, it has been renamed colloquially as the Exorcist Stairs. The real house is set a bit back from the stairs, so production designer Bill Maley and his crew built an eastward extension with a false front to allow the stunt double playing Karras to plunge directly down in the death fall from the window. Interiors for the McNeil house, including Regan's bedroom, were built by Bill Maley and his team at the now demolished Seco Studios, which was originally located on 54th Street between 9th and 10th Avenues in New York's Hell's Kitchen neighborhood. Go figure. The bedroom set would prove to be a major challenge. Not only would the set need to be built on top of advanced hydraulic systems in order to achieve many of the film's special effects, but it would also be constructed as a refrigerated set, or cold set, as it was referred to. You see, William Friedkin wanted the bedroom set to be cold enough to see the actor's breath during the exorcism, as described in the novel. Today, the breath could be added by CGI, but back then they actually had to bring the temperature on set to below freezing to achieve the desired effect. 4 large freezer units were installed above the room, which would run from midnight until the crew arrived in the morning, resulting in temperatures below zero and often covering all the equipment in a layer of ice. Now, since the film lights during shooting warmed the air, it remained cold enough to film for only 3 minutes at a time. Due to frequent breakdowns, only 5 shots could be finished each day. The complete exorcism scene, filmed in chronological story order, took a month alone to complete. The production was set back even further when the entire set burnt down, except for Reagan's bedroom. The fire mysteriously started in the middle of the night while no one was there, which led to some on the crew believing the film was cursed. The fire was ultimately attributed to a pigeon that flew into a circuit breaker on the house sets, which started the fire. But the Exorcist curse continued to loom over the entire production.
There were a couple of unfortunate deaths during the filming.
There were 9 deaths, which is an enormous amount of deaths connected with the film. Some very directly, like the actor Jack McGowan, who gets killed in the film, completed shooting, and died.
It's very simple. If you have a production that lasts 2 weeks or 3 weeks, nothing happens. But if you have a production that lasts for a year or 9 months, lots of things have to happen. Accidents one way or the other.
Max von Sydow's brother died. The assistant cameraman whose wife had a baby during the shoot, the baby died. The man who refrigerated the set died. A young black night watchman.
And these weren't casualties from stunts or things like that. These were kind of men standing behind a camera all of a sudden, dropping dead.
Of course, it always makes for great stories about what happens, if it was cursed or whatever.
It's very good for publicity, but if you don't believe in devil, you don't believe in curses. Simple.
Friedkin then moved the company to northern Iraq, near Mosul, to shoot the opening sequence. If they had just spent over a month in a freezing room, now they were subjected to temperatures during the day which reached 130 degrees Fahrenheit. This limited shooting to only around dawn and dusk. Friedkin and his team were given permission by the ruling Ba'athist Party to shoot at Hatra, which is considered the richest archaeological site from the Parthian Empire. In fact, the blacksmith shop seen in the film is across from the actual tomb of King Nebuchadnezzar, which was built upon the tomb of Prophet David. Now, there are a lot of strange stories associated with The Exorcist, too many to go into here, but two worth mentioning is after the full-scale Pazuzu statue, which Warner Brothers shipped to Iraq, but then was lost in transit and then later found after apparently certain people in customs became freaked out by the statue. When it finally arrived in Mosul, the filmmakers laid raw meat around the foot of the giant statue in an attempt to attract flies and vultures for the scene. Apparently, word of this had gotten out to a devil-worshipping cult located in the area that a group of Americans had apparently arrived to erect a statue of Pazuzu and was making offerings to it. The leader of this devil cult, believing he had found a like-minded American worshippers, extended an invite to William Friedkin to come visit his cult, which, by the way, had been suspected of murdering and beheading people in the past. Friedkin, being Friedkin, decided to take him up on his invite. I'm not making this up. Read William Friedkin's autobiography, The Friedkin Connection, for the full story. Believe me, it gets even weirder. The other strange story worth mentioning is one that concerns the disturbing angiography scene. Not only is the scene hard to watch, tapping into that very real fear of being in the hospital undergoing an invasive procedure, but the behind-the-scenes story is even creepier. Apparently, to achieve authenticity of this real-life medical procedure, Friedkin used a real radiologist and technicians to shoot the scene at Bellevue Hospital. Now, one of the radiographers in the scene is a man named Paul Bateson. Bateson would later be arrested and convicted for murdering film industry journalist Addison Verrill. He was also suspected of a series of unsolved slayings of gay men in Manhattan, known as the Bag Murders, killings he had reportedly boasted about while in jail. This inspired Friedkin to make the 1980 film Cruising, which, while based on a novel written a decade earlier, incorporated in its storyline the city's leather subculture with which Bateson had identified. Friedkin, while doing research for Cruising, even visited Bateson in jail while The Exorcist was still in theaters. Bateson was eventually released on parole in 2003. When The Exorcist finally wrapped, principal photography, which was originally scheduled for 85 days, ended up taking over 200 days. The budget, originally set at $2.5 million, blew up to over $12 million. But now it was time for post. Friedkin had shot thousands of feet of film, but unlike most studio pictures, where the editor is allowed to start an assembly cut while the picture is still in production, Friedkin forbade any cutting until he wrapped shooting. This required the hiring of 4 editors to work simultaneously to finish the picture. Jordan Leonardopoulos, credited as supervising editor, Norman Gay, and Evan Lotman, plus a 4th editor, Bud Smith, who recut the opening Iraq sequence and cut together a fit-inducing flash image teaser trailer for the film that Warner Brothers worried was just too scary. The film was noted for its classic yet jarring editing style. Friedkin and his editors would juxtapose scenes by hard-cutting from a chaotic, bombastic scene to a suddenly quiet, still scene and vice versa. This technique sets the audience always on edge, never knowing when another jarring transition is going to happen. It's part of why the picture is so unsettling in a subliminal way. Also, much analysis has been made of Friedkin's use of so-called subliminal edits, like the demonic face we mentioned earlier. Blatty, though, pointed out in one interview that there are actually no subliminal images in the film, because if you can see them, they're not by definition subliminal. They are effective, though. Sound and music work in a similar way in The Exorcist. Friedkin originally wanted legendary composer Bernard Herrmann, known for his many famous Hitchcock scores like Psycho and Vertigo, to score The Exorcist. But the two immediately got off to a frosty start, disagreeing on the direction the score should go. Next up was composer Lalo Schifrin, known for his famous theme to the Mission Impossible TV show and the jazzy blues-inspired score for Dirty Harry. Schifrin did write a score to The Exorcist, which when William Friedkin heard it, he reportedly threw the audio tapes across the parking lot of the studio. Obviously, the score was scrapped. Schifrin later said that working on the film was one of the most unpleasant experiences of his life, but he would later utilize some of these unused cues in the movie Amityville Horror in 1979. Instead, Friedkin pulled Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells from the Warner Studio Music Library. Friedkin recalled that he had wanted something like Brahms' Lullaby with a kind of childlike feel. The piece of music became synonymous with the film. Other modern classical compositions were also used, including portions of the 1972 Cello Concerto No. 1 and Polymorphia, among other pieces by Polish composer Czesław Paderewski. 5 pieces for orchestra by Austrian composer Anton Webern, and original music by Jack Nietzsche, all heard only during scene transitions. There are only 17 minutes of music in the 2-hour film. The first cut of the film came in at 140 minutes, which author William Peter Blatty loved. But Warner Brothers executive John Calley convinced Friedkin to trim the picture down to 2 hours. Approximately 12 minutes of footage was cut from the film, including the infamous spider walk, which at the time didn't work because the technology just wasn't there yet to remove wires in post. Blatty was barred from the editing room and fought with Friedkin for years regarding the removal of these extra scenes.
I know that there's been a lot of controversy about certain scenes that are out of the film, particularly the last scene. My feeling as the interpreter of that material was, we don't need it.
But there's a sense in which we did need it, Bill. You knew this relationship that Karras had with Kinderman lives now through Father Dyer. God's in his heaven, all is right with the world. That's something I think that the film could use.
I don't want to direct the way people think about this beyond what is already, to me, self-evident.
Blatty would eventually get his way, though, in 2000, when Warner's, with the approval of Friedkin, would add the footage back in, for the special edition re-release theatrically of The Exorcist. Now, personally, I prefer the shorter cut released in 1973. The pacing for the film works better, and I feel the extra footage not only doesn't add anything to the picture, but actually shifts the tone in an undesirable way. I guess it's one of the few times I actually feel the executive was right and the writer was wrong. For the one-sheet poster art to represent the main image in advertising the film, the most expressive shot created by Friedkin and cinematographer Owen Roizman in the film was used. Roizman, who had shot The French Connection for Friedkin, took a very naturalistic approach to the lighting of the picture, staying away from typical horror lighting. The film has muted tones of mostly gray and cooler blue and looks very naturalistic. The only departure from this approach is in this expressionistic shot.
The shaft of light does everything. It's like an ethereal quality to it. The fact that he's silhouetted in it, the graphics of it, the whole thing, it just feels very spiritual and very ethereal. We just see this cab arrive, and now all of a sudden there's this huge spotlight, this shaft, aiming right at this person. So you know there's something special about it.
This shot was inspired by René Magritte's 1954 painting, Empire of Light. This image has become instantly recognizable from the film and poster art.
Nobody expected it.
Let's see what
Nobody believed it. And nothing could stop it.
There are no experts. You probably know as much about possession as most priests. Look, your daughter doesn't say she's a demon. She says she's the devil himself.
I'm telling you that that thing upstairs isn't my daughter.
The one hope. The only hope. The Exorcist.
The Exorcist was finally released on December 26, 1973, and all hell broke loose, metaphorically speaking.
On December 26, 1973, in 24 selected engagements in the United States, William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist, directed by William Friedkin, opened. The Exorcist had long been awaited, widely speculated upon, and anxiously anticipated. But no one, no matter how close or deeply involved in the film, could possibly have anticipated what was to happen at every theater where this film played.
Well, we drove 100 miles, so I hope so.
Fantastic movie.
It's really gross.
It was really terrific.
I want to see if it's going to make me throw up.
As lines at the movie theaters busted the block, even during that cold winter, audiences were experiencing something they had never seen before, especially in a studio picture. Many found the movie so shocking and disturbing, there were reports of audience members fainting and becoming sick during the film, even collapsing in the lobby.
My experience with this movie has been incredible, especially with people fainting. Halfway through the movie, the movie starts getting quite violent, and people get quite unusual reactions, and we have a lot of people throwing up and a lot of people shuddering. But the thing that really surprises me is people faint. I mean, I've never in my life known a movie where people would faint. I mean, it's hard to make people faint.
The Los Angeles Times reports The Exorcist causing fainting and fleeing. Some trembled, others sought the privacy of restrooms. The majority stared into space. The Pittsburgh Press headlined The Exorcist, an experience in hysteria for some viewers, saying there were 1,300 standing in sub-freezing weather for hours at a time. The Boston Globe insisted that The Exorcist is not for the faint-hearted. About 5,000 people daily are getting a dose of psychic horror. In Toronto, the Star gives a whole page to The Exorcist on one day with news photos of crowds lined up in freezing temperatures and a report that the picture is keeping the ambulances busy.
It's frightening.
Do you think she'll go back in?
I don't know. I have a friend in there alone, and I don't want to leave her in there alone. So I probably will.
Attendance at church skyrocketed, while some people claimed to have slept with the lights on while holding a crucifix for weeks after seeing the film. Clergy started receiving requests by parishioners who believed they were possessed by demons to have an exorcism performed on them. Did you hear that?
God, I was so scared the bed was shaking and like her back. She's going up and down. Then when her voice changed, my God, I've never seen anything like it.
I think it's disgusting.
The fact that people do wait 4 hours in line and then go back in to see more after they've fainted or gotten sick, I guess it shows how far some people will go for the thrill of being chilled to the bone. And judging from my long night in the lobby, the people most susceptible to being profoundly upset by the film are those who went in believing in the devil.
At a time when the average movie ticket cost around $1.77, The Exorcist raked in over $193 million during its original release, first run at the domestic box office. Of course, after the immense success of The Exorcist, the studio was going to start pushing out sequels, which it did in 1977 with The Exorcist II, The Heretic, directed by John Borman, which in short was pretty bad. Then, more than a decade later, in 1990, came The Exorcist III, written and directed by William Peter Blatty, in short, which was pretty good. But they couldn't leave it there. Then came Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, directed by Paul Schrader, which in short was pretty boring. Apparently, the studio thought so as well, and they decided to make the picture again, but this time with Rennie Harlin taking over as director and renaming it Exorcist: The Beginning, which came out in 2004. In short, this one was just ridiculous. 1 year later, they released Dominion, which was sitting on the shelf, which at this point is just unnecessary. The only Exorcist to make money at the box office since the original was the re-release of the special edition. Then came along Blumhouse, which under the umbrella of Universal Studios bought the rights to The Exorcist from Warner Brothers to the tune of $400 million. That's just for the rights. As of the making of this video, The Exorcist Believer has come and gone from theaters and has received pretty abysmal reviews from critics and audiences alike. The film just gets everything wrong, and the filmmakers seem to have no understanding of what made the original movie work so well in the first place. But don't worry, Blumhouse plans to have 2 more sequels working their way through the pipeline. I think what not only made The Exorcist such a hit when it originally came out, but why it has sustained 50 years as a classic and is often referred to as the scariest movie ever made, is because author William Peter Blatty and director William Friedkin said they never really set out to make a horror movie in the first place. It was meant to be scary, yes, but the themes of The Exorcist are rather timeless. Blatty and Friedkin wanted to tell a story not only about the nature and existence of evil in the world, but also a film about faith in the existence of good. After all, if you are to believe that demons exist, then that would mean angels exist as well. Without spelling out a message like films too often do in a ham-fisted way today, Blatty and Friedkin presented the world with a compelling, intense tale. A horror tale concerning faith that allowed the audience to draw their own conclusions of what the film was saying. That is, after they got over the initial shock the picture inspires upon first viewing. Friedkin once said that he believed most people take out of The Exorcist what they bring to it, meaning if you believe the world is a dark and evil place, The Exorcist will reinforce that. But if you believe there is a force for good that combats and eventually triumphs over evil, then you will be taking away what Blatty and Friedkin put into the film. Well, that's it for our special 50th anniversary episode commemorating The Exorcist. Did you enjoy it? Leave your comments in the section below. Hey, Demonic Reagan, what did you think of the episode? Everybody's a critic.
Come on, give me a nice wet licorice kiss.